Good evening, visitors. Welcome to the Australian War Memorial's Last Post ceremony. My name is Yana Johnson, and joining us today from the Royal Australian Air Force is leading aircraftswoman Laura Close. We acknowledge the original custodians of the land on which we meet today, the Ngunnawal people, and pay our respects to the elders past and present. We also welcome all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people here with us today. Today's Last Post ceremony tells the story of an Aboriginal soldier as part of National Reconciliation Week, which runs from the 27th of May to the 3rd of June. We welcome the veterans who have served, those that are still serving, and the families that support them. We acknowledge the members of RSL Services Clubs Association, RSL Victoria, and RSL Queensland who are watching the broadcast of the ceremony across Australia. During this evening's ceremony, wreaths will be laid at the base of the pool of reflection by visitors to the memorial. Please stand and join in singing the national anthem.
Australians, oh, let us rejoice, for we are young and free. We've golden soil and wealth for toil, our home is earth by sea. Our land abounds in nature's gifts, of beauty rich and rare. In history's page, let every stage advance Australia fair. In joyful strains then let us sing, advance Australia fair.
The Australian War Memorial was the vision of Charles Bean, Australia's First World War official historian. Bean landed with the Australian troops on Gallipoli and stayed with them at the front through to the end of the war. The idea of this National Memorial Museum came to him at Pozières, France, in the depths of the bloody fighting of 1916. Bean's idea was that this would be a place where families and friends could mourn loved ones buried in faraway places. It would also be a place that could help all Australians understand what these men and women had endured and what they had done for us. Bean's vision, to which we remain true, is best expressed as inscribed in the entrance to the memorial's galleries. Here is their spirit, in the heart of the land they loved, and here we guard the record which they themselves made. Tonight, we'll read the story behind just one of those on the Roll of Honour, which lists the names of more than 102,000 men and women who have given their lives for us in war and operations for more than a century. But first, we present a lament, Flowers of the Forest. Wreaths of floral tributes will now be laid at the base of the pool of reflection.
Today we remember and pay tribute to Private Richard Martin. Richard Martin was almost 23 when he enlisted in the Australian Imperial Force on the 17th of December 1914, giving his place of birth as Dunedin, New Zealand, and declaring that he had 5 years' service in the Light Horse. In fact, he had been born on Stradbroke Island and had no previous military history. The reason that he claimed to be a light horseman from New Zealand was that New Zealand's Treaty of Waitangi granted Maori people full citizenship rights, enabling them to enlist. Martin, on the other hand, was Aboriginal, and as such was neither a citizen of Australia nor eligible to join the Australian Imperial Force. The 1903 Defence Act specifically excluded those not of substantial European descent from service in cadets and the militia. Richard gave his next of kin as his brother, Mr. M.A. Martin of Cleveland, Cleveland being a main access point at Stradbroke Island, and his mother, Rosie Martin, was listed as living at Myora via Dunwich. The family was well known and had lived in Dunwich until the death of Richard's father. The Aboriginal people at Myora, known as Mungalba by the local community, on the north-east coast of Stradbroke Island, were descended from the Nunakul and Gopal from Stradbroke Island and the Nugi of Moreton Island. People from the mission supported the war effort, fundraising the Wounded Soldiers Fund, and at least half of the 22 men from North Stradbroke Island who enlisted were of Aboriginal descent. Bethel Delaney remembered her uncle Richard leaving the island after he had successfully enlisted. She went down to the jetty where there was a group of people waving him goodbye and feeling sad. Richard Martin was allotted to reinforcements in the 15th Battalion and in early May joined his unit in Gallipoli. It was heavily involved in establishing and defending the front line at the Anzac beachhead. The conditions on the peninsula took a harsh toll. Martin first began to suffer from jaundice. Ironically, he was admitted to a New Zealand field ambulance before being sent on for further treatment. Later, he was evacuated with dysentery, and in December, he contracted mumps. After time on a hospital ship, he was admitted to convalescent depot at Mustafa Barracks in Alexandria. After a few days' convalescence, Martin was reported for being absent, drunk, and creating a disturbance. The first instance of what would become regular run-ins with military authorities. In December, Martin rejoined his unit in Egypt, where the AIF took on new recruits and reorganised. The 15th Battalion was split, and Private Martin was among those transferred to the 47th Battalion, which began training in preparation for joining the war on the Western Front. Arriving in France in early June 1916, the 47th Battalion participated in its first major battle at Pozières. Martin was wounded in action during the fighting on the 9th of August and was admitted to field ambulance with shell shock the following day, but he was back on duty 4 days later. In late March, Martin was found absent without leave and on top of forfeiting 8 days' pay, was punished with 168 hours of heavy labouring duties. In early April, there was more trouble. Martin was charged with, after being duly warned, absenting himself without permission from the 1:30 p.m. parade until apprehended by escort at 2:30 p.m. and was given another 2 weeks of heavy labouring duties. But there would be no time to finish his punishment before the next battle. On the 11th of April, he took part in the attack against the heavily defended village of Bellecourt. Devoid of surprise and dependent upon the support of unreliable tanks, the attack failed. Later in the year, the focus of Australian operations switched to Ypres sector in Belgium. In preparation for the Allied summer offensive in Flanders, tunnellers had dug mines beneath German trenches in the area and packed the tunnels with explosives. Before dawn on the 7th of June 1917, 19 mines were blown, obliterating the German positions. British, New Zealand, and Australian troops advanced to take the devastated ridge. Despite that success, the battle cost 6,000 Australian casualties. Martin was wounded in action and was admitted to field ambulance with a gunshot wound to his right forearm. From there, he was taken to General Hospital in France before being sent to a convalescent depot and then the divisional base depot at Le Havre, where he was charged with breaking out of camp and being out of bounds. A few weeks later, he was found absent from training parade. In late July, he returned to his battalion in the Ypres sector, where the fighting continued. After a brief period of leave in mid-September, Martin returned to his unit. In mid-October, he received a gunshot wound to his right hand, his third wound taken in battle, and was sent to England, where he received treatment and recovery before returning to his unit in February 1918. On the 28th of March, German forces attacked near the village of Denoncourt. The Germans succeeded in breaking the 47th Battalion's part of the line before neighbouring Australian units cut them off and prevented more German soldiers getting through. The Germans continued the attack in force during the day. Men of the 47th Battalion saw German troops getting off buses behind the line to join the attack. But despite heavy casualties, the Australian line did not break. Even such successes involved casualties. Private Richard Martin, who had lied about his ancestry in order to enlist, who fought on Gallipoli and in numerous key actions on the Western Front, who had been wounded 3 times in combat and been in trouble with military authorities on more than one occasion, was now among the dead. His remains were reportedly buried at the Denoncourt Military Cemetery. Later, however, his grave could not be found. Today, his name appears on the Australian National Memorial at Villers-Bretonneux, which commemorates all Australian soldiers who fought in France and Belgium during the First World War. Richard Martin's name is listed on the Roll of Honour on my right, among more than 60,000 Australians who died while serving in the First World War. His photograph is displayed today beside the pool of reflection. This is but one of the many stories of service and sacrifice told here at the Australian War Memorial. We now remember Richard Martin, who gave his life for us, for our freedoms, and in the hope of a better world.
Please stand for the reading of the Ode and the sounding of the last post.
They shall grow not old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun, and in the morning, we will remember them.
We will remember them.
Lest we forget.
Lest we forget. We leave you this evening with the words of the memorial's founder, Charles Bean. Many a man lying out there at Pozières or in the low scrub at Gallipoli, with his poor tired senses barely working through the fever of his brain, has thought in his last moments, well, it's over. But in Australia, they'll be proud of this. Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes the last post ceremony. We thank you for visiting the Australian War Memorial, and we wish you all a very good evening.